Truckfill. In last week's session, we started with Truckfill, giving you the basics of how to create, maintain your truckloads. In this episode, we're going to take a deeper dive into Truckfill and look at some of the calculation algorithms that you can pick, as well as the interaction between Truckfill and Cape Pack. I'm your host, Bart Meerschaert. So without further ado, let's dive right into the software. After hitting the Go button, you're presented with some default products in here that make it easy to showcase as we did last week. Now let's start editing this a little bit and make this a little more realistic and show you how you can import products and remove products from here. Double-clicking on this product right here, we can see that this is an imported pallet load. So what we're going to do is we are going to build our own pallet load and import this. Okay, so let's start by deleting this product from the list, which we can easily do by clicking on the delete button here, and you can see entry number 4 has been removed. Adding a product can be done by using this button right here, as well as pallet loads. So adding a standard product you can do by picking the product type right here, and you can see here you can pick from a variety of different product types. You'll enter the dimensions and the quantity and the loading rules. Let's wait with that for a second, because what we want to do here is we want to import a pallet load from Cape Pack. So when clicking on the import pallet load, we are presented with the pallet load database, where I can see a few pallet loads that have been entered in here. So the first question that comes to mind is, how do I get my pallet loads in here so I am able to import them in my Truckfill program? Let's have a look at that. For that, we will have to switch over to Cape Pack. So let's leave this Truckfill open for now, and let's fire up Cape Pack and create a new pallet load. So for this exercise, we are going to do an order fulfillment. So we're going to switch over right here to our display pallet order fulfillment. The software will load again with some examples. Here I can see I have a tray and a standard box, and just like the Cape Truckfill, I can go ahead and delete some of these. So let's go ahead and delete these two here and add our own packages to this order fulfillment. So the first one I'd like to add is a standard FESCO 201 shipper right here. And the length of that one will be 12 inch by 12 inch by 12 inch. And the package weight is 10 pounds, and we need 20 of those. We're going to allow that to rotate in the length, width, and height on the pallet to find the most optimal display pallet. Let's add another package. So apart from the 204, let's say we have another FESCO standard 406 right there. And this one is going to be 16 by 12 by 10. Whoops, let's try that again, 12 by 10. This one weighs a little more, 15 pounds, and we're also going to need 20 of that one. I can change the color. As you can see here, the previous one was orange, so I'm going to use the color palette to pick another color to set it apart from the previous one. The pallet I have selected here is a standard 48/40 4-way pallet, so that will do, and I'm just going to hit the calculate button. So that's going to calculate my pallet which we will then import into Truckfill. Here we go. Beautiful. First thing that catches my eye right here is that in order to create that order fulfillment, I'm going to need 3 different pallets. We can see this pallet. This is pallet number 1. This is pallet number 2. We can also see the efficiency of those pallets, and then we can go to pallet number 3. This is a problem, obviously, right? So I could decide here to remove 2 of these orange one and 1 of these blue ones from my order. My order would not be complete at that point, so I'm going to try something else. Bear with me. So going to our pallet, we can change here in Cape Pack the maximum overhang, and I'm going to allow a 1-inch overhang and see if that is going to result in 2 pallets as opposed to 3 pallets. Now, your loading restrictions might prevent that, but indeed, I can see here now that instead of 3 pallets, I can get by with 2 pallets. And this is pallet number 1 and pallet number 2. Awesome. So after we are done with this, we are going to save this graphic solution. We'll just call it 5, and we'll put it here in this Cape 18 private folder and save it as a Cape load file, CLF. Okay, switch on over back to our Truckfill program, where we now are going to import this pallet load. And we do that by going to the database and going to the import pallet load, or in our case, we want to import both, so the order fulfillment, which will import it in one go. You could also use the import pallet load, but then you'll have to repeat this twice, once for each pallet. So going to this pallet load right here, I'm going to pick right here number 5, the one we just created. Going to open that. The software will show me the details of this pallet. It recognizes right here that there are 2 pallets. This is pallet number 1 and pallet number 2, as we saw earlier. And that is it. So we can set a description if you want to, a load description up here. But we are good to go. So you have not exported the current load. Select yes to export now. Okay, there you go. So now the load is successfully exported to my database. So now we can go back to the add product pallet load and import that pallet load that will now show in my interface right here. So you can see there are 2 pallets. Remember, we called it 5. So I have 5 for my first pallet and then 5_1 for the second pallet. So let's import both of these. So I'm going to select this one and specify a quantity for this. So let's say we need 10 of these and say OK. And then I'm going to repeat that one more time, import add product from database, import my pallet load 5_1 and specify the necessary quantity. So that now gives me a total of 6 entries in my interface. Okay, perfect. So notice also no color, no label. So double clicking on this, you can set a color if you want to, but in this case, it's a mix, right? So we can't do that, but that's okay. So without further ado, let's pick our truck now. So instead of a 20-foot container, we are going to pick this 40-foot container. Now, very important here is to realize the maximum height of the truck. So this will obviously prevent us or allow us to stack pallets on top of one another. So before we hit the calculate button, let's go back here for a second and let's have a look at how high our pallet was. So we can actually visually see it here, right? So we have a 45.5 inch total height, which you can see here. And the product height is 40 inch. So that tells me that the wooden base pallet is 5.5 inches. So 45.5 times 2 would be 91 inches. All right, so if I go back here, we can see that my truck allows up to 93.5 inches. So that tells me that I will be able to stack those pallets too high in my truck. So the reason why I'm pointing this out is because, you know, you can really dramatically increase the efficiency of your truck. And if we go back one step in Cape Display Pallet, in the pallet you can see here the maximum height that you allow for these pallets. So I would traditionally, I would say, hey, be aware of the truck you're going to use, look at your maximum height, divide that by 2, and use that as your maximum height for one pallet. Hope that makes sense, okay? So let's go back here. This looks good, so without further ado, let's just hit the calculate button. No product dimensions defined. Let's go back and let's see if we hit this again. Please add a product. I think that was number 4 right here. So we inadvertently, remember, we inadvertently started creating a product and then we never finished this. And you can see here length, width, and height is set to 0. So we're going to simply delete this from my list, give us 5 products in total, and hit that calculate button again. Okay, so we see here based on this truck, we only need 1 truck to fulfill this order. The total load cube efficiency is 69%, because obviously based on the volume, you know, it is what it is. So let's go back and let's change some quantities and make it more interesting. So we need 2 trucks. So let's go back to our pallet that we just imported, and instead of a quantity of 10, let's say our customer wants 40 of these pallets. We can go to the next one right here and again change that. So these arrows make it easy to go through your products and make those changes very quickly. After making that change, in the list right here, you will see the details that indeed we made that change. And we can now hit that calculate button again, and we can now see that we are going to need not 1 truck, not 2, but 3 different trucks for this. So seeing these trucks you can do by selecting this preview, going to the setup button, and then right here where you see the container type, 1 of 3, we can run through these trucks. So 1, 2, and 3. Now, let's experiment a little bit with loading options, something we have not covered in our last episode. Let's say, for example, that the object product number 1, the green box, as you can see here, selected here, we need that to be loaded first in my truck, all right, because it's going to be unloaded last. Okay, so we first want to have the pallets in the front of the truck, and then this is actually the unloading part, and this will be where the cabin of the truck is, right? We can also see that if we go to load details, I'll show you in a second that we can visualize that truck as well. in more detail. So going back to my product type number 1, right here, the standard box, I can now select my calculation settings. So let's have a closer look at these settings right here. So the first thing that you'll notice is that the software offers you 4 different load algorithms. The first one, sequential, right here, allows you to load your trucks from multiple stops on a truck route. So in that case, you would have to use sequential codes for your product. Truckfill is the standard, the best way to load it. As you pick this, you will then have to also select your loading rules, and we'll experiment with that a little bit. So you can then have a focus on size, on weight, on density of the product, or by priority code. And then here you can see the product loading rules where you can use those sequence codes here in the background. So you can already see that we can assign sequence codes to each product. And we can also, if we want to, prevent products from being stacked on top of one another. And then another important option right here is the product loading direction, whether we go from the back of the truck to the front, or whether we build it up from the bottom to the top, so columns or layers. So for this, we're going to go by size, and we're going to use those product sequence codes. To finish this story, we can also do a truck container editor wizard. We'll show that later in the demonstration. And we can also do a single product fill. So let's stick with size and use product sequence codes. So in my sequence code, I want the green one to be loaded all the way in the back of the truck. So if I set a sequence code of, let's say, a higher number, let's go ahead and do that by going to the edit for this specific product, 1 of 5. So I go into my loading rules, and here you can see the sequence code and the priority code. So if I would set this and a sequence code number 2 and hit the OK button, you'll see now that all products have the default sequence code 1, and the green one now has sequence code number 2. So if we would calculate with those options, we would see that the green one still gets loaded towards the end. And the reason for that is because the lower the number, the higher the priority. So what we actually need to do is we need to set this to the highest number, sequence number 1. And then we would go into this and set this as a priority code number 2. I could keep priority codes across, so let's also make this 2 and also set these right here to 2. So now that I have set this, I can verify my sequence codes 1 and then 2. And then if we calculate now, indeed, you're going to see here the green one is all the way at the front of the truck, the loading cabin being here where I'm pointing. So that one gets loaded in here. And then all the rest has a similar priority. So let's say, for example, that I don't want that. I want all the num-pallets to be loaded also to the front. What I could do using a similar type of loading is I'll keep this one in a code 2. I'll keep this one in a code 2. And then I'll assign a code number 3, sequence number 3, and a sequence number 3 as well to this one. So going to our interface, you can see now that I have indicated 1 for my green ones, 2 for the tray and the fridge, and then a code 3 for my pallet load. So doing this and calculating, you can now see indeed that all the non-pallet loads get loaded in the front of the truck, and then my pallets, further down the truck. Let's have a look at the other trucks. So going to the setup buttons and going to the second one, that looks great, and the third one right here. So let's say now, for example, that I want to add some additional barrels because this is not very efficient, this truckload. So to make it more efficient, we could combine this with additional objects. So the traditional way of doing this would be going back, and as we showed you earlier, I could use the add product to add this to my interface. So the way that would work is you would come in here and you would pick, for example, a cylinder, and we could call this drum like so. We could specify an SKU code, a location, whatever you need there. And let's have a look at the dimensions. So we're looking at a 40-inch diameter and a 40-inch height. And this one is 75 pounds. And let's see, we're going to need 4 of those right there. So not specifying any loading rules, I can set the orientation to be upright. Typically, you want to limit this depending on the content of this. So we'll add that cylinder to the calculation, hit that calculate button again, go back to our setup buttons, and we'll now see in the last truck, we should see the quantity. Oh, hang on. I probably didn't specify this. Let's go back. Where is that drum? Quantity 4. That is specified. Weight 75 pounds. That is correct. So let's have a look at why that would not be loaded. So in my truck right here, I have a maximum width of 92 inch. So that should allow 2 of these to be placed next to each other. Let's have a closer look again. 40, so this looks right. Loading rules, let's see what happens if we make this a little lighter and recalculate this. It probably is loaded, but it is probably hidden in the view. So 1, 2, 3. So what I can do is I can go through these products as well, like this. I can show a top view, side view right here of my product. What we can do here as well is we could go to right click and show you, like we did last week, the built up view right there, show built up view. And indeed, right here, you can see the barrels were loaded, but they were loaded very first in my truck. So again, to prevent that from happening, we do need that loading sequence. So I'm going to set that sequence right here to number 4, right? So go to edit, go to the loading rules, set my sequence to 4, and okay that. And then if we recalculate now, we should see that towards the end of my load. There you go. We've got 2 that we can fit in here, and then the remaining 2 we can fit in the second truck. Perfect. So really optimizing that. Now, last thing I'd like to show you here before we part ways is the edit container load. So this is a great way to manually switch to the load editor. This was option number 3 in my sequence as well. And again, let me show you if I close this here for people in the audience that didn't see where I clicked. It is actually the little white icon right there, edit container load. And I believe you can access this right here as well from the edit menu. Right? So edit container load will bring you into this editor. where you can now see visually what the truck looks like. So I'm looking at truck number 3. I can specify different views: frontal view, side view, back view, and side view from the other direction. I can picture from different angles. I can also go to my view menu and look at my space grid, so that gives me a nice visual. I can see the axle support. So the indication right here, 1 and 2, comes from the actual truck, the way I set that up, and we showed that last week, I believe, how you create that and set those distances in the truck design wizard. And then we also have some really great statistics here in the view restrictions, where we can check if this load violates the center of gravity check, and it does right there, because I have all the weight on axle number 1. If I would go to truck number 2, so if we would close this and we would look at the second truck, and we would go to this Truckfill editor, and we would run that same restriction, we can see also here that we have a violation. And we can see more in detail using the statistics how much percent of the total weight and the percent weight each of these items in my truck represents. So I can see that my item number 4 and 5, so essentially my 2 pallets, represent almost the entirety of the weight. It's obvious. And then the drums, you know, a little more right there to finalize that. And then we can see here the percent weight on the first axle and on the second axle. So it's fairly well distributed. So I got 53% on the front, 47% on the back. Now, what's really nice about this editor is that it allows you to make changes to this. And let's go back to the third one right here. Go back in here. You can see that you have a selection tool here, the select box that gives you an overview of all the different products that we have on the truck. Selecting a product you do by clicking on this little box right here. So currently I have this drum selected. You can rotate it if you want. And then a simple click in the interface allows you to position these in your truck. So just a click like that, click like that. You can also do things like stacking, for example. So if you have a mouse with 2 buttons and a wheel, it works better than I have a Mac mouse. So you're going to have to figure out your function keys. In this case, for example, function up and function down allows me to copy those into the height. Deleting one you can do by selecting it and function key delete, like so. And you also have the ability to move the objects around, and using the option key, you can move them within the volume of the truck. So this is another way, excuse me, to create that load in the truck. And what we can do here as well is do things like reposition the load. So from side to side, for example, right here, we can go center load, side 1 to 2. So now it distributes it in this direction or in the length. And then if we run that statistics again, we can see now that we have an even distribution over those axles, again, very close, 55, 45. So I would say if you want to use this, go ahead and explore a little bit what you can do in here. You can basically build your own loads. You can then visualize it. You can also see any of the labels that you assigned using this little label icon. In this case, we didn't do that. But if you would come into here go back to your products, you'd be able to set a control face for your product. So let's say this box right here, I can say this is my control face pointing forward. And then you would have a possibility here to add a 3D graphic to that case. So if we say, for example, this is Coca-Cola, and then we recalculate, this will now be displayed on here. And so also when we go to that load editor, we would have the possibility to visualize this. This actually only works with labels that we assign. So a label is a number that you can assign, and that doesn't work for the graphics. So again, we'll go back to that specific one, that fridge. Right there, the label code was right there, label. And then in input settings, we would ask to show the product description right there. So, okay, so that kind of concludes our overview for our second session. We took a little deeper dive into the software. We showed you that you can really import, cancel that, you can really import a variety of different products in here. We also showed you that we can import pallets from Cape Pack. There it's important to realize when you build those, the height in relationship to the trailer height. And then we also kind of played a little bit around with these options right here. So, for example, a last option here, the single fill wizard will essentially load one product in my truck as efficiently as possible. So whenever you start using Truckfill, just be aware of these calculation settings. Go ahead and play with these options here, these loading priority, to get the exact truck fill that you require. So with that, we came to the end of session 2. We'll repeat this session in case you missed it next week. So stick around for a repeat of this truck fill session where we look a little more in depth into the calculation settings and the combination between Cape pallet, display pallets, and Truckfill. Thank you very much for your attention, and we'll see you next week for the next session.